Hello, and welcome to the podcast known formerly as For the Love of Nature, a podcast that tells you everything you need to know about nature and probably more than you wanted to know. I'm Laura.
And I'm Katy. And as Laura just said, formally. So we're not leaving, which is funny. Yeah, I was going to say, which is funny because we did take that long break and didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And now we're like, we're formally. But yeah, so if you guys are Facebook friends with Laura or I, we reached out and we asked people if it's time to change the name here. And so we're changing the name. We're not starting over or anything like that. So we just want to run through why we're changing it, our thoughts behind it. And yeah, just let you guys in on why we're moving this direction.
A lot of you have been with us since the very beginning, and we want everybody to know like how big of a decision this was and like why we're doing it in the first place. What do you want to do, Katy? Like tell them what made you start to think of a name change or where we started?
Let's just do where we started, like the purpose of the podcast in general. Because
some people have never listened back to episode number 1.
Yeah. And Laura and I talked about this the other day. So first of all, like Laura said, like we did not take this name change lightly at all. Laura and I talked about it. But whenever we really started thinking about like, okay, what's the point of us starting this podcast? All right. Laura and I both grew up with Steve Irwin, the Crap Brothers and things like that. And I don't know, Laura and I have just always been talkers. There's that. So, but at the same time,
never not been a talker.
Right. But at the same time, this is our passion, is the storytelling aspect of it and the nature and the conservation and everything. And so when we want to continue that, but sometimes you just have to make decisions that are more like business decisions for what's going to be best for the brand and in general.
Well, and so when we first started this whole thing, it was just, if you've listened to episode 1 at all, we were just like throwing around ideas. We've talked about a podcast for years, but like it was just like like all of our other ideas. But then Katy was like, hey, let's do a podcast. And I was like, okay. But I was serious. And Katy was like, really? Yeah. And I said, yes. So let's do it. So we did it. And our goal was to, one, just be able to try something new and reach people who we decided were the Nature Nerd Nation, which was just people like us who were curious and nerdy. And that hasn't changed. So our goals haven't changed because thanks to you guys, we've been doing so amazing.
Freaking amazing. If you guys are listening, actually, should be once you listen to this one, you've noticed ads because Laura and I have been able to monetize and everything.
We did it.
We made it. So to be able to get there, you have to have so many downloads and everything like that. If you're following either of us on any of our social media channels, you'll see I've been blowing it up with. Guys, we're actually in charts now. So on Good Pods, which if you're looking for a really good platform to listen to podcasts on, Good Pods is amazing. It focuses more on indie podcasts.
Yeah, it's easy to navigate.
It's super easy.
Spotify's nice because you've got your music and your podcast in one spot.
Yeah.
But if you're just going to do podcasts, Good Pods.
Yeah. Good Pods is the way to go. It's free. It doesn't cost anything, which is amazing. And like I said, it focuses on the indie podcast. So any podcast that's supported by multi-million-dollar networks they're not on there. And so you find some really fantastic podcasts on there. And you can friend request other people and follow other people and see who your favorite podcasters are following and things like that. But over on Good Pods, Laura and I, let's see here, we've been number 1 for weekly, monthly in both science, nature, and in freaking comedy, which, guys, that's mind-blowing to me because comedy and humor are the biggest categories of podcasting out there.
Right. People want to listen to funny stuff.
Yeah, and the fact that Laura and I have been breaking into that is mind-blowing. But then, let's say a broader scope, all right, Good Pods is mostly the indie podcasts and things like that. But then there's Apple Podcasts, and
we also were reaching some charts there.
Yes, and we've been as high as 26, I think, right now on the nature and science category, which is insane.
Yeah, because like that's the biggest of every podcast about nature.
Yeah, we're beating out multi-million-dollar broadcasts right now. And it's just 2 dweebs listening. We're in 95 countries right now. Guys, we're doing this. It's all of a sudden just taking off. And so whenever we started reaching out to people being like, hey, we're thinking about changing the name. Some people were like, okay, no, it's dumb. You guys are finally climbing and everything. Keep that momentum going. You don't want to change it. And we get that. However,
well, and the idea first came about, this wasn't even on our radar until Katy accidentally stumbled upon a great name.
Yeah, I was helping a client who wants to start another science podcast generate some names. And they're probably going to be like, what the heck, Katy? But
Yeah.
I was generating a bunch of names, like just a list of different things. And Wildly Curious popped up, which is the new name, like my trumpet song. And so Wildly Curious popped up, and I was like, oh man, that is amazing. And I sent it to Laura on a whim to be like, dude, if we ever renamed the podcast, and again, didn't really mean anything by it.
She just me a thing saying, hey, what a cool name. And I'm like, yeah, what a neat name. And then recently I've been really getting into the analytics and stuff like that and studying the podcast, studying trends to really make ours better and to get it ahead. And clearly it's paying off. And so I have a system set up. But anyway, long story short, I've been able to scrape across the internet every single night, all this data that's pulling into a spreadsheet for me, and was able to throw it into ChatGPT. Thank you, ChatGPT, and have it analyze it against our podcast with the name and just like the description and where we're fitting. And this is when I say it comes down to a business decision more than, a nostalgia for us that we've been holding on to this name for 3.5 years that Laura and I both, there's nothing against it. It's just, we have a great community now. Yes, we are just getting into all the charts, but we're going to end up plateauing sooner rather than later. And Laura and I just don't want to do that. And it's real. I think explain to people why I think that you believe that like we'll probably plateau. Because to me, I think that most people don't understand like the computer side of this.
Yeah. And so, I mean, one, for the love of nature, since Laura and I have started, I've always felt like, and Laura said the same thing, it's kind of like a tongue twister.
It's really funny, but it's hard to say fast.
It's very hard to say fast, and which makes it nearly impossible. I have to at least say it 2 or 3 times to people when I run into them out in public. So it just doesn't make it memorable. And so it makes it hard for us to be like, oh yeah, just listen to our podcast for the love of nature. What? It's for the love of nature. Like just nobody remembers it when they walk away from you.
Yeah.
So there's that, but then also within that scope of search engine optimization, are people really going to be able to find us? The answer is yes and no. I mean, to an extent, people are finding us. They might be stumbling across us. Good Pods has been fantastic in pushing out and highlighting a lot of our episodes that we've
right.
That have
or
been,
like if you're typing in nature, okay, yeah, yep. Eventually
you'll find it, but it's just not as strong for findability. And so again, it comes down to a business decision. And that's why I told Laura whenever we finally talked about it. We were shooting messages back and forth, and finally I just said, I was like, listen, let's talk about this. I don't want to make this decision lightly. 1, 2, Laura and I both had to be, behind it. We got, feedback from a bunch of different folks, but ultimately making the switch to Wildly Curious is just, it makes sense. Not only from our perspective of who we are and what the podcast legitimately stands for, but it also describes our audience too. They're just as curious as we are.
Yeah, you guys who are listening.
Just as curious about the weird things that Laura and I talk about. And so it's a little bit better.
For the love of nature, of course, you guys are interested in nature, and we hope that you will fall in love in nature, hence the name. But at our core, and hopefully you all that are listening right now, at your core, hopefully there is a spark of curiosity. So when we were trying to think of, okay, that yes, it's a cool name, but does it say what we needed to say about the podcast and about us? We came to the conclusion that we are curious at our core. Katy and I are both like insatiable learners, and part of ADHD, but also just who we are. And we're always willing to dive down a rabbit hole or learn more. And
that's what makes it fun.
Yes.
I mean, that's what makes life fun.
I truly believe that one of the meanings of life is the truth, knowledge, pursuit of knowledge, being curious, having wonder and awe. Without that, life is just flavorless.
Yeah.
The curiosity is there, and then Wildly Curious hopefully brings in a little bit of the nature and how crazy and weird and quirky we are.
Mm-hmm.
So we aren't leaving, not only is it the goal is not changed, but the actual podcast hasn't changed either. We're still going to be covering the topics we've always covered. Our niche here is nature and science.
Yep. And that's not going to change. And that's the biggest thing we want to emphasize is like literally the only thing that's changing is the title.
Yeah. And we just think it will open things for us too. That it's because we do talk about, of course, brains are part of nature, but we are really covering just a bunch of different topics dealing with science.
Yeah. Yep. So it's going to be the same. You'll see the cover art's going to remain the same. We're just going to take out For the Love of Nature, put on Wildly Curious. And same thing like our website. If you still go to Nature Pod, podcast, you'll still get to our website. But the new website is Be Wildly Curious, which is amazing. And so everything's just lining up right now. So again, emphasis on nothing's changing. Like Laura and I are still going to do the same type of topics, everything like that. We simply just had to change the name so that it's a little bit more discoverable and the findability behind it.
And so that you all have an easier time of telling we are where we are today. Yes, because of the search engines a little bit, but a lot of it is truly word of mouth. You guys are our friends who are listening, or our friends or acquaintances. So, when somebody asks, hey, you love that new podcast, what is it? Wildly Curious is just going to be easier for us to all say to each other.
Yeah. It just rolls off the tongue so much easier than For the Love of Nature. Again, it's always been, the only way I could ever describe it besides like a tongue twister is that like it pinched my brain. Every time it was like,
well, I was saying
like
to Katy
pinch.
that like anybody with, your Pittsburgh accent and then whatever I've got going on, some kind of valley thing with it where it's like for the love, like FER, for the love of nature. And so it just sounds like a slur, like for the love.
Yeah.
So Wildly Curious is very enunciated.
Yeah.
So too, hey, if we ever make it and we go on the road and we're doing our thing on a stage, it'll just be easier for Katy and I too to say what we're saying because we're already going to be nervous enough.
I already can't say scientific names. Like I have to be able to at least say our podcast name and not stumble over it. So Wildly Curious, guys, I hope you get excited about the name change and everything. So thank you definitely for everybody who is listening, those who are supporting us. Everything, like I said, is going to be the same. It's just going to be Wildly Curious. So we'll be changing all the links. If you're a subscriber, you don't have to do anything. We're going in on our end and changing the name and the hosting platform. And so if just the title will be different. You don't have to resubscribe or anything like that. It'll still pop up exactly the way it always has. Is that milk that you're drinking?
No, it's moonshine.
Okay.
But
okay.
Moonshine
it's
looks like milk.
Thick milk.
It's like key lime moonshine.
Oh, okay.
And I am drinking it out of a 6-ounce baby bottle. But for everyone listening, there's no nipple on this. Okay, it's just I needed a conveniently sized glass.
You just hear like,
yeah, I'm over here sucking on moonshine.
As you just got done saying your Valley accent or something. Oh, goodness. See, guys, nothing's changing. It's just the name. It's just the name. We're still just two idiots that people choose to listen to around the world. So anyway, but we did want to give a couple shout outs to some folks. So whenever we were giving out feedback or asking for feedback about the name, one of our youngest and one of our early listeners, AC, has been around for a while. We found out that she named our previous axolotl that was on the cover art that we had no idea that she did. So we have a special request for AC. If you could please name the kookaburra and the fox because they don't have names.
Yeah. Although I do think that they're supposed to represent us.
They are, but they need cooler names.
But you can also give like our alter egos. Please give us alter egos.
Yes.
Yeah. And then some of our other, we have such good listeners, everybody.
Yeah. Kristen and your mother-in-law who have been early supporters of us on Patreon and have been supporting us for a while.
Ellie from Ohio, who's listening to us every single time that podcast comes up. Thank you. Old friends, family.
And then our IT support who always ends up helping me with anything that's internet related, who asked if I could give him a shout out but refer to him as Douglas Bubble Trousers. Which is an amazing alter ego alias name. But we've had so many people support it. My grandma listens all the time. So shout out to Ruth. So many people have listened to us and supported us through this. This is simply a business switch for us on our side. And so just thank you guys all for doing this. Please get excited. Please start telling people. Because again, you can remember the name now.
Yeah. Well, not just you can, but hopefully everyone else that you tell can.
Yes, absolutely.
Let the Nature Nerd Nation grow. Katy and I are ready to take this show on the road.
We're so ready. We are so ready. Please help Laura and I be unleashed on the world. Just going and talking to people. So upcoming, you'll see the transition. We're still going to put the name formally For the Love of Nature on some of the podcast stuff. It's a little bit easier transition if you missed this episode. But other than that, thank you guys. Make sure you search for Wildly Curious on Patreon. And like you said, it will be switching everything over. Well, by the time this episode gets released, it'll all be switched over.
Yeah. And we're going to be releasing our content as usual.
Yep. Next up, I think, is the birds episode, right?
Yeah, flight. Physics of flight.
Physics of flight. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. All right, guys. Until next time, stay curious.